Chapter 31. Walking the Line. I approached the guard to the backstage. I said, I need to join my man in the garden, and he let me through while keeping the crowd at bay. As I walked through the secure area of the government plaza, I kept wondering why Caesar wanted the cities together. Then I wondered if Mr. De Niro was siding with Phoenix now, and if this was a move to break the Legion's strength. Just before I found Mr. De Niro, I remembered what Joshua said. He said that Caesar wanted to annihilate Phoenix, but I couldn't piece together why he would throw his whole army at the walls of Phoenix and Scottsdale. Underneath the shaded platform between the stage and the government tower, I approached Mr. De Niro, who was talking with the mayor and some Phoenix officials. Mark saw me standing idly by, and the Phoenix governors asked, "Who's he?" Loudly and approaching me, he said, "He's just my right-hand man after Mr. Kekos, of course." Ha ha ha. Giving me a playful two-punch gesture, he asked me out loud, "Do you have my prescription, my good man?" Throwing his arm around me, we walked away from the crowd of Phoenix governors, into the main building, and into a lavish little lounge reminiscent of something you'd see in Scottsdale. Sitting down across from me on a red sofa in the fancy little room, he said, "Quite the speech, right? How have you been? Haven't seen you since we parted ways at the Palati, haha. How was soldier school or whatever it was?" I said, "We gotta make this quick. I have to meet up with the agents soon." Interrupting me, he asked sternly, "How was the speech, though?" I said frustratedly, "It was great, Mark, but I don't get it. You told Caesar that you were trying to get them to hand over the city. That was even what the resistance wanted." He said cheerfully and glanced around the room, ensuring we were alone. "Change of plans, actually. You see, Caesar predicted that Swilling's boys were going to try a withdrawal sometime after Havasu fell. Looks like he was right." Ha ha ha. I said, "That doesn't answer the question." He said, "Oh, right. You see, Caesar wants a massacre. He wants the people to put up a fight and ordered me to make peace with Phoenix while you were in Havasu. How was that, by the way? I heard about you getting shipped there from that Frumentari guy, Domini Platos. He's kind of a dick, by the way, ha ha ha." I interrupted him before he could go off on a tangent. Does Caesar really have the strength to fight the unified troops of Phoenix, Scottsdale, and the Army of Glory? Why would he possibly want this? He nodded and puffed his cheeks out in mock contemplation before saying, "I know it sounds a little odd, but how would it look to other tribes or towns down south if our mutual friend, the mighty warlord, could just let any Joe Schmo escape his grip? No, he wants the people here to fall in battle in the worst way. He said that it would send a shockwave across the wasteland that would demoralize everyone standing in his way down the road." I sat there still puzzled and said, "I've seen what Caesar's guys can do. Hell, I was there myself. Havasu was a huge tribe, but those were just tribals. Phoenix, Scottsdale, and the U.S. Army ain't a bunch of mud worshippers, as they say. Phoenix can do some damage." Mr. De Niro said with a smirk and reached across the coffee table to give me another playful punch as he said, "You underestimate the big baddie up north. There's more to this whole scheme than a frontal attack with spears and sticks." He saw my face and tried explaining the whole motive for the plan clearer. "Don't worry so much about the how, just know that if Caesar can destroy the mighty unified forces of Phoenix, Scottsdale, and the U.S. Army, what would stop him from obliterating the puny bands of tribals that he already conquers? Havasu is a tribal city and a good start, but if Phoenix falls in battle, there is no stopping him or our buddy, the legate." I caved at my other organization's set plans and asked, "So, what are my orders from Caesar?" His pearly white grin grew again as he said, "Glad you asked. Since the resistance still wants an evacuation, you're to help them in whatever way you can. The catch is that you need to report everything you do for them to me. My own intel says that they got you seeking assistance from minor factions across Arizona while they attempt to tame hotspots in the southern deserts. All you gotta do is do your little dealios, mark wherever you go, and tell me what the resistance is going to get from any factions you contact. Also, I definitely need a route for their proposed evacuation." I thought to myself about Mark's own sources, supposedly from within the resistance, and wondered how he could have possibly known about my assignment of contacting local groups. I said to the man, "I can do that, and I have a list of the factions I was assigned to seek out. Do you want that now?" He was about to nod with glee, but stopped and said, "No, not right now. Find me after you deal with your first target. I want to know how that plays out before I report the methods in which these groups sorta operate." Then he added, "Ha ha, Jack didn't pick the best person for this task, did he?" I shrugged. I guess I don't know. "Anything else I'm supposed to do?" He smiled. "Not really, man. Just do whatever they want you to do and tell me what happens. When the time comes, you will be asked to join Caesar by someone. Probably that guy, Domini Platos, but again, he's kind of a dick. Anywho, Joshua Graham said that after the losses at Have SU, they'll need to strengthen their forces a tad. Apparently, he's going all out this time, taking his legionaries from all over the territories for one massive push into Phoenix. He even said that they're postponing their first push into Colorado to make an example out of Phoenix. At that point, I figured we were done and stood up. Well, I gotta get out of here. I already got my orders from the Resistance, and I'm gonna have to head out soon. He interrupted. Wait, I almost forgot. He handed me a note. There is something else. There's a tribe that Kaiser wants to help in the assault on Phoenix and thought, who better for the job than my newest agent, haha. He wants the atomic stalkers to infiltrate the city with explosives and assassins and whatnot. He's got a whole plan for them. But Kaiser just wants you to make contact and give them the what's what before dispatching another Frumentarii guy to oversee the biz. I glanced at the note and Mark said, see, our boss wants as many allies inside the city during the assault as possible. Spoiler alert, he wants to gut Phoenix from the inside out. Brutal, right? Ha ha ha. Anyways, you know the atomic stalkers fortified Cave Creek to the north, so I don't need to tell you how to get there. All you gotta do is have a chat with them and ensure they're on his side when you get around to it. He paused a second and gave me a creepy grin before saying, man, this battle for Phoenix is so rigged. Ha ha. Kaiser got a whole plan to make the city implode without a single legionary. Isn't that cool? Anywho, you should probably skedaddle. Good luck, buddy. I got up and walked off. Yeah, we'll keep in touch. Before reaching the door to leave, the most powerful man in Scottsdale shouted, stop! I turned around. He then studied me for several moments before saying, and hey, have some fun out there. Then he gave me a legitimate wink. I wondered what was up with every sadistic or strange Legion supporter I've met using winks. I contemplated yet again what a weirdo my partner in crime was, and how he became one of the Legion's most valuable assets in the whole wasteland. I said, okay, bud, and walked off hearing the guy laugh to himself. I left the Phoenix government building and entered the crowd that was still bustling about the area after the speeches. I pushed my way through the crowds and recognized several resistance members patrolling. I finally encountered Mr. Swilling and several other team leaders, including Doc Martin, on the edge of the town plaza. As I approached, I noticed Mr. Swilling was not happy at all. He was making wild hand gestures, but I couldn't hear what he was saying over the noise of the crowds going about the post-ceremony fair. I approached and asked Doc Martin what he was so angry about, but knew the answer the whole time. Every resistance member was furious at the idea of staying to fight the Legion. Mr. Swilling was furious with Mayor Sillin and how he betrayed their original plan to evacuate the city. Soon enough, the rest of them headed back to the capital, and Doc Martin ordered me and several other gathering agents to stay in the city to patrol and look for suspicious activity among the population. Doc Martin told me to stay in a brothel and cantina called El Pata de Gato until further instruction. I asked about when to start my independent assignment, and he said, we'll let you know. Chapter 32. Valley Superstitions. Over the next 3 days, I stayed in that brothel and walked the outskirts of the city during the day. This was the first time I really spent in the city I pledged to protect. Every other time, I was only in the town on an errand or passing through on the way to the butcher shop en route to the capital. So, I took advantage of that time to get to know Phoenix and take notes on everything that was happening. On many days, I observed Phoenix guards working alongside the U.S. Army troops to plant mines on the border of town, while the entire city armed itself for the upcoming battle. I knew the battle was likely months away, considering it would take Kaiser a while to mobilize enough legionaries and tribals for the assault. However, people trained and drilled with the Phoenix Guard, and I began to notice flyers on old telephone poles and walls throughout the city. Most of the flyers went something like this: People of Phoenix, the Legion is coming to our beloved city and will inevitably triumph. You can still escape with your lives. The Legion will not stop until the entire city falls and you are enslaved or killed. Your brothers in the shadows of Phoenix are organizing a mass evacuation of our city. We urge all of the sick, elderly, women, children, and men with sense to march with us to safety when the Legion comes. You, the people, can still live on, but our city has already fallen. Your guardian angels of the valley, guards and people hoping to fight, were seen tearing down the posters, but more would quickly show up in their place. The resistance needed people to fall in on the evacuation plan. However, the collective mindset of the valley immediately following the speeches and unification made the effort seem futile. It looked like the whole city wanted to stay put. I remember thinking that maybe if enough people were willing to fight, then Caesar might lose the battle. Then I remembered who Caesar was. Caesar was the kind of person who took what he wanted no matter what. He was known by this point as the conqueror of 38 tribes and was going to use all of them to take this city. Also, those 38 tribes didn't count the prepper communes, raider fortresses, or nomadic bands he captured or killed in the north. Before Caesar, tribes up north were not all squabbling little villages. I knew Havasu was the 38th tribe, and based on how massive that one was, conquering 37 northern tribes was something that sent fear all the way to Phoenix and riled the place up enough to the current situation. If the centurions present at Havasu were any sort of reflection on the tactical mind of Caesar, he was not going to let his forces go head-to-head against the walls of the new united city. I knew he had an ace in the hole, and my mind went to Scottsdale. When I wasn't taking notes on Phoenix troop positions and activities of the populace, I was lounging around at the brothels bar and eavesdropping. You can learn a lot about people or places through idle conversation, even if they're just stories. Considering I was an incognito defender of Phoenix, I liked learning about the place. For example, one thing about Phoenix and Scottsdale was that both of them had a surplus amount of medical supplies. Phoenix primarily used them to create drugs and feed its squatter population. Scottsdale used them to advance in the medical field, like their innovations in facial reconstruction and cosmetology. The question was stupid but innocent. How do the two cities have so many doctors and drug components? Some say it happened through trade in water from the Colorado Reservoir, but overhearing conversations suggested something else. Leave it to drunk locals with too much time on their hands to explain things through conspiracies and legends with a hint of truth like, some people are certain of an organization that works with the Phoenix and Scottsdale governments to supply the valley with medical tech and pharmaceuticals. The group is supposedly called the Night Hospitalers, and stories say that they inhabit one of the few large standing buildings in the middle of the Phoenix ruins. The building is inaccessible to most because of the radiation, but anyone with binoculars on a roof looking south can see a cross symbol and a sign that says it used to be a hospital. Apparently, the Night Hospitalers are a group that strides the wastes at night in black armored scrubs, dotted with Red Cross symbols who sack caravans for medicinal goods. Word is that they're paid under the table by both valley governments to keep the valley healthy or drug-dependent at any cost. I thought that was the stupidest story ever, but people swear up and down that they've seen shadowy figures with shining red crosses on caravan runs along the edge of blasted-out Phoenix. I never would have thought that there were so many superstitious people in Phoenix, but there were. Stories of the Night Hospitalers were the sole reason caravans carrying drugs and medical equipment refused to depart Phoenix past 3 p.m. Hearing more stories and learning more about the people of Phoenix led me to believe that all the legends I heard were just excuses for their misery or lack of action. Despite how large Phoenix was, and its status as an oasis of civilization, Caesar and Mr. De Niro were right in a sense. Phoenix was full of people who were going literally nowhere in life and simply lived for their next fix. Of course, that wasn't everyone, but a large majority were. So, it was easy to dismiss much of the legends and stories as nonsense or ramblings until I had my own encounter with a particularly famous Arizona legend. At night on the 4th day after the city unification, I unlocked the door to my room and saw Bailey sitting on the chair across from the bed. She handed me a letter and said, "It's time for you to help us unify the wasteland. Have you heard of the Lost Dutchman's Mine?" Chapter 33, Scrappers of Gold Canyon. I told Bailey, no, I haven't. Unveiling her hood, she began, "I know you got your list, but something big just came up recently. The first assignment we need you to handle on that list is the scrap town of Gold Canyon. They're a small community mostly made up of retired prospectors or scavers. They scavenge robotic plants, junkyards, old army bases down south, and mostly keep to themselves." I asked, "Yeah, I saw them in my ledger. Why are a bunch of old prospectors vital to the evacuation?" Continuing, she said, "The community has many salvaged items in their possession that can help us on our march to our new home. Also, the community has some of the best trackers and desert wanderers in the wastes. Think of the place as a retirement home for the best wasters to come from the desert. This means that they also know the best routes to take as we lead the evacuation without us being ripped to shreds by raiders, preppers, and mutant monsters." I said, Seems like a good idea to recruit them then. What's with this lost Dutchman thing you mentioned? She sat down again and motioned for me to do the same. Taking a seat on the bed across from her, she started, "The old legend says that there was a prospector who moved to Arizona long before the bombs fell, who began mining the Superstition Mountains in search of gold. He disappeared months later in the mountains, and nobody knows where he went, or even where his mine was located. Ever since then, people have gone searching for the mine and nobody has found it. Some even died searching for it. Anyway, the community up at Gold Canyon has gone silent, but we recently received a coded message from one of our allies there saying that the Lost Dutchman's mine has been found, and they need an agent up there immediately. In the letter is the message and the location of the town. You are to head out immediately and make contact with a man by the name of Mr. Grevsky. He is the one who sent the message, and has done some business with us in the past." I said, "Sounds good. I'll head out there first thing tomorrow morning." As she got up and headed out the door, she turned back to look at me. "It should take you a couple of days to get there when circling south around the ruins, but do try to hurry." She stopped momentarily and said, "Don't think we just forgot about your story in Legion territory. All our agents are busy with their own assignments, and will know how you complete your objectives. We're putting a lot of trust in you, Drifter." I looked back at her. "There is nothing you have to worry about," she said. "I hope so," and headed out. I slept well that night and headed out just before dawn into Scottsdale. The guard stopped me by saying that I wasn't up to the new dress code. I told him that I was there to see Chief Ambassador Marcus Dinero. When that didn't faze him, I remembered the weird code phrase he had me use to get backstage and tried it. I said, "I need to join my man in the garden," and the sentry lowered his machine gun to let me through. Scottsdale was just as glamorous as ever, but now there were more Phoenix residents wandering about and taking in the city that they were excluded from only days ago. It was easy to see who was from Phoenix by looking at their dirty old suits and dirt-smudged faces, unlike the clean and proper Scottsdale residents. I walked past the Bridgeton Towers that Mr. Dinero and the other Scottsdale elite called home when Mr. Kekos approached me with his new face and said, "You have been offered a horse by our mutual friend for easy travel across the wastes." I wasn't expecting that at all. I was just on my way to the Scottsdale/Wasteland East Gate and told him I didn't know how to ride one. He led me around to the stables by the eastern gate and gave me a half-day's worth of lessons about the basics of riding. In the end, he let me have the light gray irradiated animal I was practicing on that happened to be well used to inexperienced riders, and gave me 2 packs of Dandy Boy apples. He said that a couple of those per day should keep the Pona moving like usual. I guess the irradiated nature of Ponas meant they didn't have to eat all that often. When needed, they could eat the dead grass and half-burnt bushes around the desert or one of the nearly 200-year-old packaged apples. When all was done, I rode out that east gate on my new steed and was told to re-enter Scottsdale when I was done with whatever I was doing. With that, I rode into the ruins of the city, going far faster than I ever would have walking. I had to essentially circle around the entire valley because of the 3 bombs that destroyed Phoenix. It took the rest of that day of near-constant riding before I reached the chipping old highway going southeast. However, I was making a far better time due to the Pona. Upon the crumpled highway surrounded by seas of deserted ruins and sand, I saw old spray-painted signs that guided me toward the scrap town of Gold Canyon. Passing wasteland creatures, I rode on by and past hollowed-out strip malls and houses that were spared the blasts but fallen due to disrepair and looting. The sun was almost completely below the west, and I reached a spot where I could see the town starting to light up beyond a small mountain once called Silly Mountain. 30 minutes of fast riding went by. The sky was dark, and I could see people going back into their shacks just outside a little junk wall surrounding the small settlement. Upon reaching the entrance, I saw a few mercenaries approach, and they said, "Town's closed. Go back to where you came from." I yelled up at a tower while several armed men trained their guns on me. "I'm here to see a Mr. Grevsky." Almost on cue, an old man with a long gray beard and old prospector clothes pushed open the little barbed wire gate and said, "Follow me, boy." I trotted my Pona alongside him, and he stayed quiet while I observed the town. There was a lot of junk scattered about, and half-put-together robots from old Protectrons to military sentry bots. I even saw what looked like a restored old Chrysalis highwayman outside another shack. The man who I assumed was Mr. Grevsky had me dismount from my Pona by the junk patch church in the center of town. I threw the reins over a hitching post and followed the old-timer to his shack just across the way. Inside, it was a musty little building that had robotics scrap all around and lots of hiking and mining gear. I just happened to notice a little black box thing in the corner of the shack above the door, with a faint red light blinking on it. The man pulled out a chair from the table in the center and told me to sit. I did as he suggested and sat down at the table across from him. "There," he began. "You hear the old legend from the big-timer boys saying, 'Go beat some of them boys in red' by those men calling the ground their home?" Confused, I asked, You are Mr. Grevsky, right?" He said in a raspy old voice, "Yes, sir. Folks call me Grev, and this be the best old town out here with the crows bringing in the goods and leaving old bygones be bygones. But it ain't much more of a post with the ruckus and the sinning. Undergrounders true to them's words and scrappers been waiting on a fine preacher man." Still confused, I said honestly, "I'm not really sure what you're talking about." Without pause to consider, the old man rasped on in his gibberish, "Yep, them old foothills be amongst the ghosts in that old scrap heap making every who what heard and no stone unturned. Devils here quite a bit, and folk can't chip a hand given all that temptation." I suddenly realized that he was speaking in his own bizarre code, but I still couldn't quite understand what he was getting at. Trying to clue the guy in on the fact I realized his game, I said, Them boys calling the ground home had me drop on by to make sure old Grev was still kicking the dirt or kicking up daisies. Make sure Scraptown give us a hand when them boys in red give the old bird a howdy ado." He gave a light slap on his knee and nodded in acknowledgement, saying, "Goody goo, mister. Scrap heap haunted by the old ghost of the West, and that old pick swinger keeping every who-what in the clouds ain't making no kind of sense. Got the lil nighttime boxcar trinket making a wee woo, giving ain't no bad juju in the desert and keeping us chicks in the eggs despite Mama Bird's injured wing." I realized that the lil nighttime boxcar trinket might be the little black box in the corner of his shack. Maybe? It suddenly occurred to me that the town was being monitored, so I said, "Looks like the spirits of the Old West are haunting the scrap heap. Maybe stopping the good gettins with the bird folk in the canyonway?" He nodded contemplatively and said, "Sounds like it could be. You can hit the hay here and we'll lift that old Pache curse on the warrior's cuckoo nest when the black turn good. Keep me from hitting the bottle, would ya? Same's as keeping the reaper ways away from old Grev. Go ahead and shut an eye or two and don't let a thought creep out of that gullet." Just like that, Grev stood up, rolled out a sleeping bag for me, and laid down in his bed. I laid down my pack and took off my gear. I tried to piece together what he was telling me while I fell asleep. It seemed like he was saying that the town was being monitored by something, and that there was something in the foothills, or the warrior's cuckoo nest, that was doing it. When he said that we were going to lift that old Pache curse, it felt like we were going to confront whatever was monitoring the town in the morning. I felt a lot of it was just gibberish, but I figured keywords about boys in red referred to the Legion early on. Also, the references to birds were in regard to the Resistance or the people of Phoenix. I still didn't understand if he was going to assist in the evacuation, but when talking about the nighttime boxcar, he followed by referring to him and presumably the town as chicks stuck in eggs. Then some sense clicked, and I figured that whoever was monitoring the town needed to stop before he and the town could aid with Mama Bird's injured wing. I could have had the whole situation wrong, but my orders were to enlist their help. So, whatever this rambling old-timer needed doing was what I was going to do. Chapter 34, Curses Do Exist. When morning came, or when the black turned good, Grev tapped me awake and said, "Brahmin ain't gonna feed themselves, and I gotta get me a new fishing battery for that junk bot." He was wearing hiking gear with a small backpack and a large bundle of rope across his body. I assumed we were going into the mountains/foothills/Pache warrior's cuckoo nest. Without saying anything, I got dressed into my normal gear and headed out the door with him. I walked through the town following the old man as he bid good morning to every resident of Gold Canyon we passed. The two of us emerged into the desert east of town with Gold Canyon getting smaller and smaller and the mountain getting closer. As we walked through the desert, Old Man Grevsky still remained quiet, and I kept my eyes on the trail in front of us. Eventually, we reached the base of the towering mountain and hiked up the narrow pathway snaking the wall. As we got higher and higher, the rugged trail got steeper and Old Man Grevsky began to speak. "I assume you got the gist of what I was saying last night?" Huffing and puffing and struggling to keep up with the elderly man, I said, "So you can talk like a normal person after all?" He looked back and let out a chuckle as we continued up the rocks. "Yep, the entire town is being closely monitored by a group of creeps." I reached over a sun-bleached rock, hurled myself over and replied, "I think I got that much." "Who are these ghosts or whatever? What do they want?" He said, "Not really sure who they are, but if we drew too much attention to ourselves in my shack, they would have killed us in the night." I guess my gibberish helped, haha. Anyway, that little black box you noticed in the shack is one of the things they're using to monitor the town and record everything that's being said. I asked, "But who are they? Why are they monitoring the town?" He began a short story about the situation, about a year back. A group of our townies went searching for the lost Dutchman's mine that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's kind of a tradition in this area. Once a year for decades, Gold Canyon prospectors head out for a week-long hike up the mountains in search of the thing. Anyway, last year's party encountered a group of power-armored creeps with big guns, and 5 of the townies got captured. Peralta maps didn't say nothing about them, haha. Anyhow, 2 of them got away, but before they could reach the town, the armored creeps already locked down the place and vaporized the local caravan traffic. The guys said they were the remnants of the U.S. Army, but I didn't believe them. I'd seen the U.S. Army when I did some business over at Luke AFB a few years back. Anyway, they told all of us to resume business as usual and that they were conducting business at a base in the mountains. They just said to turn away traffic and they would leave us alone. I windedly asked, "So what happened next?" The experienced old prospector continued his story without any shortness of breath as we scaled tall rocks. So, things went well and relatively uneventful for a while, until they didn't. We Gold Canyon folks didn't want any trouble until word slipped, and some people got antsy. A month and some change ago, the creeps in the mountains caught wind that some of the townies were trying to hire a gang of mercs to track him and wipe him out. So, the creeps appeared out of nowhere again, liquefied the conspirators, planted cameras and voice recorders all over town, and said no one was allowed to leave town again. He looked back, saw my concerned expression, and added, "Not really sure why they didn't mind you coming into town, ha." I asked, "So, what are we doing out here on this rock then?" He laughed, "We're gonna ask him to leave, ha. I got Mr. Swilling's message, but we can't do nothing for the people of Phoenix until we get rid of those creeps in these mountains. As long as they're here, the town is on lockdown. Since they installed the cameras, some people have tried to run away and ended up as piles of ash or plasma goo. Luckily, I had a ham radio and got Mr. Swilling's message in time. Shortly after I coordinated with Mr. S, the creeps must have found where the signal traffic was coming from because I showed up at my shack one day to find the radio busted. Can't say for sure why they didn't kill me for that, ha. Them folks certainly are a peculiar bunch." Stopping in my tracks, I said, "So, we're just going to waltz into their base and get ourselves vaporized? But before that, we're going to politely ask them to leave." He immediately retorted, "Hopefully no on the vaporized part, but you and I are going to see what it would take to get them to leave. Now quit your bitchin' and man up. We'll be fine." Walking on, I said, "You couldn't possibly know that." He said, "Nobody's ever walked towards them since the townies stumble-found the creeps. If they wanted us dead, they would have liquidated us as soon as we stepped foot outside of town." Worried, confused, and short of breath, I said, "You better be right about that, old man, for your sake." He laughed at my tough talk and said, "For both of our sakes, boyo, now keep up. I've got at least 40 years on you and I ain't huffin' and puffin'." We hiked on and I had no idea who we were up against. From the sounds of things, an old prospector and a drifter with a rusty shotgun were not going to be a match against these power-armored and big gun-carrying creeps. We stopped only for water on the seemingly endless mountainsides. Even Grev didn't really know where he was going, and we were basically hiking the mountain, hoping to be stopped by these well-to-do crazy guys he was talking about. We made decent use of the rope when needed, scaled the grand walls, and took short breaks on protruding rocks. Eventually, we came upon a great ridge looking out over the entire valley. Past the craters and sea of ruined metropolis or suburbs, I could just barely see the edge of post-war Phoenix in the distance. We sat down by the ridge, and I looked out over the scrap town only a few miles away. I wasn't expecting a hike up a giant mountain when I was told to go to Gold Canyon, but Grev was loaded up like a pack mule with supplies. He shared some of his water, then Grev slung his canteen over his shoulder and began walking towards the next ridge we were going to scale. I got up and shuffled forward to catch up. He clearly had more experience at mountain climbing than me despite his aged physique. I was several feet from him as the next little ridge got closer when a hand-sized silver ball shot straight up out of the bush between us. Grev whipped around at the noise. The ball hovered in midair for 2 seconds, while giving a rapid beeping sound before detonating in a bluish-purple explosion of sparks. I was in the blast radius and felt the shockwave wash over me. The nerves in my body shut off one by one, and I went into complete paralysis. There, I fell to the ground, stiff as a board, and unable to even control my eyelids, which were locked in a wide-open state. Grev lay there in the sands, looking at me with his body locked in a mid-walking position. We both lay there in total paralysis when I saw 4 humans encased in giant suits of black power armor that I'd never seen before. The men carried big guns and approached us from the corner of my gaze. Through a static voice, one of the giant tin men said, "Look, boys, it's old Grevsky. We know all about you, Grandpa. And what's this? You brought your grandson?" Looking at the others, the same armored creep ordered, "Load him up." Major said he actually wants to speak with them. My vision suddenly started to rapidly blur, and I blacked out just as I saw one of them throw the stiffened old-timer over a giant steel shoulder and proceed toward the mountainside. Chapter 35. Post-War Men and Pre-War Legends. I awoke lying face down, my hands bound in handcuffs behind my back and inside a rocky cave. I heard a soft buzzing sound and turned my head to see a clear blue electronic force field and old man Grevsky lying face down beside me. We still had our clothes on, but our packs, guns, and various survival or hiking equipment were nowhere to be seen. I heard the old man let out a loud snore, so I gave him a swift kick in the side with my bound legs, and he woke up shouting, "Who? What?" The man settled himself down and turned his head to me. I said, "Hey man, you okay?" He suddenly winced in apparent pain and said, "Yeah, slight headache. You?" I realized that I felt the same way and agreed, "Yeah, same here. I think we're in their base." He suddenly darted his head around and really took in where we were. He broke the silence with a look of childlike glee and shouted, "We did it. We found the lost Dutchman's mine, ha ha." I gave the old man another sharp kick and Whisper yelled, "Keep it down, old man. We don't want them coming in here for us." He ignored my suggestion and spoke again in his overly loud and raspy voice. "Yeah, we do. We want to talk to these creeps, remember?" I managed to stand myself up and waddled towards the force field. On the other side and several feet down the hall, I saw a tattered black flag nailed to the cave wall. The flag had a large E in the center surrounded by 13 stars. I said to the old man, only half expecting an answer, "Who the fuck are these guys? Did they ever say who they were?" Then I thought out loud by asking, "And why does that flag look familiar?" Old man Grevsky responded, "The creeps just said they were US Army." But I didn't buy that crap. I thought to myself momentarily and wondered why the E symbol looked so familiar before we heard the force field buzzing halt. Turning towards the entrance, in came a man wearing an olive drab green jumpsuit-looking thing with tall black boots and a black cap with the E emblem on it. Following the man were 2 of those giant black armored soldiers with glowing green weapons. Grev and I both figured we were dead at that moment, but the suited man in the cap had an overly cheery grin as he said, "Good evening, mutants. Have a good sleep?" Grev and I looked at each other puzzled, and then back at the man before I said, "Mutants? We ain't no stinking mutants." He responded gleefully again by saying, "I see why you'd think that, but if you were born in continental America, your DNA has been 100% corrupted by the background radiation from the Great War. This means as much as you'd like to think you're a pure human, you are most certainly not." I didn't think I was kidnapped to discuss whether or not I was a human, so I shot in, "Nobody cares, guy. What do you want from us? And who are you?" Without changing his joyful expression, the strange man said, "Where are my manners? I am Captain Taylor of the Enclave." I asked, "What's the Enclave?" But then I thought really hard back to things I'd long since forgotten from back in California. I remember visiting the hub with my pa and brother when I was 10 or 11. I recalled an NCR propaganda poster I saw with the E symbol, and the headline read, "Enclave defeated at Navarro." Captain Taylor interrupted my recollection by saying, "We are the last remnants of the United States Commonwealth from before the Great War, but that's not important right now. You're probably wondering why you are alive and not a smoldering pile of ash. Is that correct?" Grev and I were both wondering that very thing and simultaneously said, "Yeah." Captain Taylor resumed, "Well, we need an outsider's help. And since the 2 of you were brave or stupid enough to track us down, you won the lottery. Congratulations, muties. You have been selected to assist us." I was relieved that we weren't going to be turned into a smoldering pile of ash, and curious about why. So, the 2 of us responded with, Sure, I guess. What do you want with us? The captain gave a nod of acknowledgement and said, Perfect. I'll have the major explain. Follow me, would you? Also, bear in mind not to try anything, or you'll be killed. We got up and the two armored giants uncuffed our legs. We started following the captain and I looked over the facility. It was definitely an old mine, but the place had terminals and control panels bolted to the rocks connected by long electrical cords. There were more soldiers in that black power armor, all marked with the E symbol, walking the halls and carrying large energy weapons or miniguns. As we walked, the captain began to speak. I take it you guys have heard the story of the Lost Dutchman's mine. Grev said more enthusiastically than I would have. You betcha. Been an Arizona legend for hundreds of years. About the old miner that disappeared in the 1800s. Captain Taylor glanced back and nodded in semi-astonishment. Wow, you muties really know your stuff. Thought that story would have disappeared in the bombs. Anyway, in the year 2040, the U.S. sent a geological team to survey the Superstition Mountains for uranium. Though they did find some traces of it, they came across the wreckage of a pre-20th century mine. So, in 2042, the Arizona state government began to build a secret government shelter in the old mine and covered any press wanting to see what the geological team found. They said they found nothing and instead focused their uranium survey on the Grand Canyon. So, after we found records of this installation in some old databanks from back in California, we moved here. However, this installation is only a temporary outpost for government troops to rally at. I interrupted. Why are you telling us this? He said, because if you help us, we will move on our way, and you guys can say that you found the Lost Dutchman's mine. Isn't that exciting? I wondered about the Gold Canyon townies the Enclave initially captured over a year ago, but asked, so why monitor the town of Gold Canyon? He replied frankly, well, we originally just kept to ourselves, but when the scrappers found us, we knew that we couldn't have scavengers knocking on our doors all the time, and someone would be stupid enough to tell the whole wasteland about us. So we locked down the town and cannot afford to waste the ammunition in obliterating everyone. The townsfolk kept their word for a while until we intercepted a communication looking for a mercenary army to assault us. So the monitors were installed, and we had your little community keep our secret under penalty of death. Trust me, we'd love to get as far away from your filth and leave you all to carry on with your insignificant lives, but we're sort of stuck here. I asked, really? How so? Still staring forward and leading the way, he said, I'll let the major explain that situation. He used his keycard to open a hydraulic door, and we entered a small command room with a crudely drawn map of Arizona on it. Sitting beside the table and sipping from a mug was a man wearing a nearly identical uniform to Captain Taylor, but with gold leaves pinned on the shoulders. The major saw us enter, set down the cup, stood from his chair, and said in the same fake polite way as Captain Taylor, Welcome, wastrels. I am Major Braxton, and you are going to run an errand for us. Understand? I knew the cheery or polite tone of these men was fake, but Grev answered by sputtering, yes, sir. What do you need from us? Major Braxton's fake smile grew wider as he said, Good. I love when muties are willing to help and not just stew in their own filth. Then he added a clearly false compliment as he continued, And well-mannered too? By the way, it's good to meet you, Mr. Grevsky. We have a lot of intel on you. Grev pulled at his beard and said, Good to meet you too, sir. The major went on. Perfect. By the way, that fake conversation with your friend there was one heck of a hoot. You two and your code talk, ha ha ha. The two of us remained quiet. I knew Grev was feeling far less crafty than he previously thought. Major Braxton resumed, Anyway, you muties actually won the lottery, but I'm sure the captain already told you that much. We would have used the captives we obtained when we got discovered for the task ahead of you, but unfortunately they were executed a few months ago for being too rowdy, irritating, and uncooperative. So, you two are going to help us get out of here. I asked the question Captain Taylor wouldn't answer. How are you guys trapped here? He immediately said, Glad you asked. So, we set up here a year ago after some time at a facility called Bloomfield Space Center. We claimed the place for several years following the fall of Navarro, but migrated here when circumstances changed. During the battle at Navarro, our vertibirds took a beating, and though they got us around for many years, Bloomfield lacked the repair equipment we needed to join our brothers in the East. Records showed that there was enough space in the hangars here and enough equipment to repair our vertibirds. However, the supplies were redirected to Luke AFB before the bombs fell, and the inventory log back at Navarro was never updated. We found the shipping manifests here saying that the parts were sent to Luke Air Force Base, but initial scouting reports of the area show it's inhabited by a large group of wastrels, saying they are connected to the U.S. Army. After attempting contact with them, they could not give us the proper call signs, thus indicating that they were a rogue element, unlike our initial outreach to the Hopeville Silo complex in California. I asked, "So you want us to infiltrate the U.S. Army guys at Luke AFB and get you the vertibird parts? Any idea how the two of us are supposed to carry several crates full of aircraft parts back here?" Major Braxton looked shocked that I managed to figure out the task, but ignored my last question by continuing his explanation. "Yes, indeed. We want you to locate the boxes and tag them with an IR marking. At dawn, you guys will be flown to the base. Your task is to find the boxes, likely in their hangars, and mark them. The IR tagging will tell us where they are, and at dusk we will distract the whole base long enough for my troopers to cart them away. I suppose your main goal is to verify their locations so my men aren't looking under every rug in the middle of hostile territory. They should still be intact, considering the earlier models of vertibirds were not delivered to Luke AFB. Also, we need you two to get us a crate of fusion cores. Our power armor suits are nearly dry, and we will definitely need them for the flight east. The two of you should be able to carry a box of fusion cores together. Just head towards Phoenix, and a vertibird will pick you up under the cover of dark. And before you ask, we do have one operational vertibird. The other three are not flight ready anymore, and that's why you're doing this for us. Any questions?" The two of us remained silent, but before he dismissed us, I asked curiously, "You guys said you were heading east, right? Where are you going?" He sighed. "I suppose I can answer that, considering it is practically impossible for the people here to ever reach us, given the 2,000+ miles of merciless wasteland, of course. Well, over a year ago, we left Bloomfield because we finally managed to establish comms with the rest of the Enclave. You see, just before the fall of Navarro nearly 15 years ago, a large percentage of the remaining Enclave's forces were dispatched to the east a while after our oil rig went up in flames. So we found out that the Enclave relocated to a place on the east coast called Raven Rock. They don't even know if Navarro has fallen. We are the remnants that were cut off from the base during the initial attack. For all we know, it's an NCR, or Brotherhood military base by now. Anyway, you will be given your equipment back to infiltrate Luke just before you go. We can't have you wandering this installation, so you will have to be confined to your cell. So, your task begins tomorrow. Do us good, and you'll get to walk away from this." Chapter 36. Two Birds. The next morning, we were woken up very early by one of the soldiers in black combat armor marked with the E symbol, and a guy in a white radiation suit. The rad suit guy strapped harnesses around our torsos, with little black boxes attached to them that looked much like the voice monitors in the town, but slimmer. The soldier tossed us our packs of confiscated gear and said, "We will be monitoring your movement to the Air Force Base. There is a GPS, microphone, and a small block of extra volatile C4 in those devices, so be careful when moving around." I asked what the C4 was for, and locking the harnesses behind our backs, he said, "If you reveal any information about your task or any details about us, they will detonate, killing yourselves and anyone within a 10-foot radius. You got it from here, Doc?" The rad suit guy handed us each a can of what looked like spray paint and told us that this was the IR marking. The soldier was kind enough to elaborate on our task and said we were to make a large X on the boxes containing the aircraft parts when we found them. The mysterious spray was said to emit a flash to the Enclave's satellites and rapidly upload the coordinates. Finally, the soldier handed Grev a small rolled-up paper that labeled the boxes we were looking for as VB02, PTS 08305. Not more than 10 minutes later, we were in the hangar bay, where there was one of the giant flying contraptions on a platform, 3 more beat-up ones off to the side, and a small team of mechanics idling around. Opening the hatch, I jumped in and sat down with Grev. We were both amazed that we were actually in a vehicle that could fly. The pilots walked through the middle, took their place in the cockpit, and a power-armored soldier sat across from us, studying our every move through his eye ports, with both hands on his glowing green plasma rifle. Before long, there was a loud hydraulic sound like giant doors were opening. The rotors began to spin, and we started moving. I felt us take flight, and I couldn't believe it. There were no windows in the cabin, but faint light showed in from the opening to the cabin with the faded purplish and yellow hint of early dawn. The only true light in the cargo cabin was coming off some of the emergency egress panels and the glowing yellow eyes of the trooper's helmet. As we flew, the vertibird gently rocked, and I shouted over the whir of the engines, asking the trooper why they needed a couple of wastelanders to do this job, as opposed to highly trained soldiers. All the faceless trooper said was, "Shut up, mutie." With that angry static voice shouting over the whir of engines, I was silent. Still, I pondered the situation in my head. I wish I had asked Major Braxton that question, but concluded with an explanation by myself. Maybe they needed us to infiltrate the base because we wouldn't draw a lot of attention approaching their gate. It would seem a bit weird to see heavily armed Enclave soldiers approach the Army of Glory and ask to look for aircraft parts that were shipped there by mistake almost 200 years ago. Thankfully, my involvement with the Resistance and corresponding business at Luke AFB made me an unlikely perfect candidate for the Enclave's mission. I wondered if they knew that all along, considering the Enclave busted up Grev's radio after he coordinated with Mr. Swilling, although that prospect somehow seemed even more coincidental. After less than 20 minutes of flying, I felt the aircraft begin to land, and the pilot said over the intercom, "Get out, muties! Press the button on the left side of the harness module when you are in a safe place to extract, and don't press the button on the right side, unless you want to turn into a fine red mist." With that, Grev opened the door and we jumped out. The vertibird began to fly away, and we stood there in the open desert on the opposite side of the valley. It was still dark out, with the sun's glow just barely starting to come up over the superstitions. Looking at my watch, it said 5:22 a.m. Just to the north were the faint lights coming from Luke, and far to the east of that was the brighter lights of Phoenix and Scottsdale. To the south of that was the tiny outline of the Capitol hidden in the glowing radiation of the Phoenix crater. Grev and I knew our task, but since I knew I had resistance business at Luke AFB, I decided I would take the moment to settle my own objective, and pulled out my mission reports to read. Ensure the cooperation of the U.S. Army at Luke AFB, and see if they are ready for our runner, who will coordinate their forces and detail the logistics of evacuating the people. Inform General McMahon that we need extra troops allocated to secure the evacuation site itself. I read the report and reminded myself that I had a task alongside the current mission with the Enclave. Stuffing the documents back in my pack, I felt a little block of C4 locked to my stomach and nearly died of a heart attack when my arm brushed the right side button on it. Tasks noted, and missions in focus, we started to head north to the Luke AFB gate. We walked for a while until the sun started to cover most of the valley, and after a half hour, we reached the gate surrounded by signs that said, "No trespassing." Grev was looking for a hole in the fence to slip through, but I insisted that that wasn't necessary considering my business for the Resistance. He was relieved by that, considering our task was made that much easier. As we walked up to the gate, a guard at the sandbag barricade yelled out, "Halt! What's your business here?" I shouted back, "We're agents from Phoenix. We need your assistance." He stopped and talked to some of the other guards. After a few minutes, 2 power-armored soldiers, one in T-50, 1B, and one in T-45D painted tan like the desert, approached us with weapons drawn. They towered over us and said, "What do you want? We don't have anyone from Phoenix scheduled to arrive today." I told him that we were with Swilling's Resistance, and that we needed to speak with the commander about supplies for the evacuation. With an eye on us, the steel man in T-51 said, "Follow close." We walked through the worn-down old base and saw people everywhere. Women and children tended to farming plots, while the men clad in combat armor patrolled the base or did exercises. We walked through the still fairly maintained roads, passing barracks and old administrative buildings. We reached an opening where we could see the runway scattered with the broken-down remains of old bombers and fighter jets. Just off the base were 3 large buildings that I figured were the hangars. The guys escorted us to a 2-story building marked HQ, and we entered it past the guards. Inside, there were many people working at desks or wandering about in old military dress uniforms, minus the cracked walls and bits of debris. It was like we went back in time to a functioning military base before the bombs fell. We approached a set of double doors where our escort knocked and asked permission to enter. Hearing a come in from the other side, they opened the doors, and I got a closer look at General McMahon. He sat there at his desk all glorified and in a pristine set of old-world military attire. The power-armored man said that we were Resistance members coming on behalf of Jack Swilling, After telling us to sit down, we did, and the power-armored men stood behind us. The general started by saying impatiently, "Well, what does Mr. Swilling need from us?" I leaned over to Grev and quietly said, "Let me do the talking." The old-timer nodded, and looking back at the general, I said, "Sir, I'm sure you're preparing for the upcoming battle at Phoenix, but are you aware of the Resistance's plan?" He said, "Fill me in, son. Wasn't Jack talking to Mayor Sillin about some sort of evacuation? He ain't still trying to do that, is he? My boys alone can hold off that army of Roman LARPing mud-dwellers on our own, let alone with help from all of Phoenix and Scottsdale." I tried to appease the proud and zombified general by saying, "Yes, indeed, Mr. Swilling still plans to carry out the evacuation." I saw his face twist to confusion, and I added, "Now, we are going to hold the city against the Legion, thanks to our combined forces. But the fight will most certainly be taken to the streets and homes of the people." Interrupting, he asked, "So, what is Jack requesting exactly?" I said, "Well, I was sent here to ask you to allocate some troops to the evacuation staging area. We need an extra reserve force inside the city to secure the evacuation rally point and hold back the Legion from butchering the sick, women, and children caught in the chaos." He asked in a self-assured way, "Why would we need to help everyone evacuate when you said it yourself that we will hold the city?" I paused for a minute before saying very sincerely, "General, with all due respect, I have seen what the Legion can do firsthand. I have seen their forces in Sedona and personally witnessed what happened to the Havasu last month. They will enter the city." The ghoul general raised a patchy eyebrow as I went on calmly, "Although we have the strength to win the day, the innocent residents of Phoenix and likely Scottsdale will be in the middle of the fight. All we need is a few of your best men to help keep the town square safe for people who don't have the ability to fight back." The general sat back in his large chair and twisted the end of his thinning mustache. When he looked back at me, he said, "All right, sounds good. You can tell Mr. Swilling that we will send an extra squad of our best to secure the rally point." I sighed, "Thank you, sir," but then remembered the Enclave's task and made up a bullshit lie on the spot. I said, "Oh, there is one other thing." The general looked impatient again and said, "Yes?" I wasn't really sure where the lie came from, but I managed to say, "The Resistance came across an old military storage depot with 10 fresh suits of T-45 and T-51 power armor down south by Fort Huachuca. The problem is that the suits don't have any power. Those suits can really help us prevent some losses during the battle." He jumped to where I was going and asked, "You want some fusion cores?" I said, "That would help. We just need enough cores to march the suits back to Phoenix, and then some for a hopefully short combat engagement." He asked, "How long will it take to get them back to Phoenix?" I continued the lie, "Under a week if the team moves fast enough. We got some guys waiting out by Phoenix, ready to make the run when they got what they need." He eyeballed me and thought to himself before saying, "I can do that. I'll have the boys in supply requisition a crate of 30 fusion cores. That should be more than enough. A dry suit can last at least 2 days of continuous use before needing a fresh one. God knows we have plenty of the damn things. Some of the lighter aircraft here before the bombs ran on FCs, so we have more than we'll ever need. Just head to the armory before you go, and they'll know you're coming. Oh, and when this shit is all over, we'll want them back. We got the only working FC recharger system here in probably the whole world, so tell the recovery team not to trash the things when the juice runs out." I said again, "Thank you, sir. This means a lot." Then I remembered again that we had to locate those aircraft part crates. So, I begrudgingly asked the patience-thinning general, "Just one more thing." Again he sighed and said, "What else? Jack want my coat, liquor, or cigars too?" I gave a false chuckle for the general and said, "Yeah, if you don't mind, could you let us survey your base here?" He was about to ask why as I continued. I was also tasked with looking for potential rally points. The evacuation group might have to proceed through here if our eastern route gets cut off. Hopefully not, but if we have to, we need to mark some potential safe zones. Then I tried to comfort the general by staying true to my resistance orders while attempting to draw the demands to a close. Someone else should be along within the coming week or so to elaborate which was true according to my orders. "You can even have someone escort us around the base?" Clearly trying to rapidly end the conversation, he blindly responded with agreement, "Yeah, that should be fine. I'll have one of my best ghouls show you around. He should be here in the HQ, so just look for Staff Sergeant Quinn Andrews' office." I was a little surprised and said, "I know that guy. He led the team to recover Master Walker a while back." He was just about done speaking to me Good, you know him. Well, unless there is something else you need, I have work to do. I said, no sir, that should about do it. Thanks again, we'll see ourselves out. Looking down at the papers on his desk, he said, and we got up and walked down the hall where we saw a sign on a door that said, Staff Sergeant Andrews. Chapter 37. To be of service. I opened the door, and Quinn Andrews looked at his visitors perplexed. He eyeballed me up and down and said in his gruff, ghoulish voice, Don't I know you from somewhere? I said, Yeah, I think so. You led the team to help rescue Master Walker. I was one of Swilling's boys there. He smiled. No shit? You must be the guy I startled on the ridge. I nodded, and his crackling, radiation-corroded voice added, Welp, glad you're still kicking. Hell, aren't you also the guy who cut that fella down from the gallows? I nodded again and responded simply with a, yeah. He crossed his arms and sat back in his chair. What was his deal anyway? What did he do to piss off those preppers? Still trying to protect the legate's true identity, I said, He was just some courier who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Preppers abduct people all the time. He got up. No kidding. Anyway, what can I do for you two? And looking at Grev, he asked, You with the Resistance too? Can't say I've seen you before. You a new member of Doc Martin's team? Grev spoke the first words he said since we entered the base honestly enough to not explode. I'm from Gold Canyon, just been helping Swilling's boy here do some business around the valley. I had almost forgotten that the Enclave was listening to every word we said since stepping off that aircraft. I got incredibly nervous and mortally fearful about how the old man would answer when Quinn Andrews asked innocently, You from Gold Canyon? That place has been silent as the grave for at least the past month or two. Some caravans say nobody left the town in over a year. Haha, what's going on over there? Grev and I's faces remained steady, but I could tell that Grev knew the next words out of his mouth could possibly kill us all in a giant explosion. Quinn Andrews spoke in a good-natured tone, so I was sure he'd be fine with it when I not so subtly changed topics by interrupting. General McMahon said you could escort us around the base. We have to locate potential rally points for the evac. Quinn didn't even care that I jumped into the conversation, and I swore I heard Grev give an audible sigh of relief. The ghoul staff sergeant simply answered with, Oh, I get it. Secret resistance business, right? And gave a slight wink. Then he went on, I heard about that evac, didn't think Mr. Swilling would still be going through with it, and I'd be glad to show you around. I just can't wait for the fight, ha. I've never killed one of those Legion boys before. But yeah, I'm not doing much right now. Let's go. We walked with him, and he showed us all around the occupied parts of the base, which took several hours. Eventually, it was midday, and there were no signs of the Enclave's cargo in any of the areas explored, not even in the supply depot or armory where we found the crate of fusion cores that we were going to take. The box of nuclear batteries looked fairly heavy, but I was sure that Grev and I could carry it to Phoenix, or at least halfway before we called in the vertibird. Something in my gut told me we had to check the hangars, and so I told Quinn. When I asked if we could check them out, he said that there was just a bunch of junk and boxes full of decrepit aircraft parts. I immediately knew that was where we had to go. I made up a lie about how we could hide the massive evacuation group in the hangars in case of emergency, and I had to strategize about its possible fortification. He agreed and took us past a gate guarded by several soldiers leading to the hangar units and uninhabited part of the airbase. Quinn was a talkative man who explained everything around us the whole tour and all the way to the hangars. I didn't mind the guys talking, but I did remain fearful that he would ask more about Gold Canyon and the strange activities there at any moment. I had my own explanation to avoid exploding, but couldn't read Grev's mind to see if his was good enough. By some miracle, Quinn all but forgot about Grev's town, and that spared us from possibly disclosing the explosive information we harbored. We finally reached the hangars, and I pulled open the giant steel door to the first one, revealing a mess of debris. The whole hangar was packed to the brim with parts of buildings and junk from the base cleanup many years ago. The second one was much the same, and I dreaded the idea of having to go through all that wreckage to find the boxes the Enclave wanted. I couldn't find a good lie or reason to sort through all that trash for the life of me. I eventually gave up and reasoned. If I ended up having to do that, I was going to press the right side button on my voice recorder/C4 block and kill myself immediately. However, the third hangar unit was much more cleaned up and organized. There were several containers, large, unopened boxes, and crates all stacked neatly against the back wall. There they were, 2 large steel boxes on the southern wall all by themselves reading VB02, PTS 08305. The fact that the exact thing we were looking for was sitting alone against the wall was like a sign from God or Mars or whatever was out there. Upon seeing our target, I briefly considered making an elaborate lie as to why we needed to spray paint those 2 particular crates, but telepathically agreed with Grev on a more subtle approach. Grev discreetly pulled out the note he was given detailing what we were looking for and gave me a slight nod. I strategically placed myself in a position that would make Quinn focus away from the old man and diverted the ghoul soldier by saying, "There's plenty of space in here, Quinn, in case we have to hide the majority of the refugees. There are plenty of defensible positions around these hangar units, and that fuel station across the runway can make a good rally point for any who get scattered on the retreat." He agreed, and I watched the old man wander inconspicuously towards the crates. I tried to keep Quinn's attention on me. Taking advantage of the military ghoul's talkative nature, I asked, "You're a ghoul. You from before or after the bombs, Quinn?" He smiled, and I saw Grev discreetly pull the IR marking out of his satchel. Quinn said, "Me? Oh, I'm from long before the bombs fell. Originally, I'm from out in DC. You know where that is?" I said honestly, "Nope. I think I heard of it from old books, though. It's out east somewhere, right?" He grinned again and responded empathetically to my ignorance. "Yes, it is. I joined up out of there and been serving the good old U.S. Army for almost 200 consecutive years. Aha. Yep, fought against the Canadians in Montreal for several years. Then I got shot up and lost a bunch of good friends at a lumber mill east of the Yukon front line. The nightmare was called LM5. Luckily, I got patched up just in time to kick some Chinese ass in the battle for Anchorage." I said, "That's pretty cool. I heard the Chinese were bad and all, but I'm not really sure what a Canadian or a Montreal is. Ha ha. What are those?" He paused for a moment, and I looked just past him. Grev was marking the containers with the X's. I focused back on Quinn. His face had a hint of dread and disgust as he said, "Doesn't matter anymore. Lots of bad stuff happened over there, and it's best left to history." He remained silent for a long moment, seemingly lost in recollection. Suddenly, he changed his tone and mood completely by asking cheerily, "Where you from anyway? You live in Phoenix your whole life?" I said, "No, I grew up out in California. Had to leave when I was just a teenager and have been sort of wandering the roads or living alone ever since. Kinda just stumbled into the resistance by accident, haha. Sorta gave me some purpose though, you know?" He smiled and said, "I've lived in California before. Well, under California. Just before the bombs dropped, I was stationed at a missile silo in Death Valley called the Hopeville Ballistic Missile Defense Complex. Yeah, when the bombs fell, the general, a dickhead by the name of Martin Retzlaff, locked us all in there. There were a few dozen of us that were spared the explosions outside, but when the earth shook, it knocked the leftover missiles out of place, corrupted the computer systems, and somehow fucked the base's reactor. The outside radiation and the rads from the reactor started to seep in. Over the next few months, maybe even a year, we all either died of radiation or became ghouls. I honestly found his story about California very interesting and asked, what happened next? He continued with a hint of anger or sadness in his voice as he detailed the time immediately after the world ended. Well, by this point, we all realized that despite how ugly we were pretty much immune to radiation and wanted to leave. Maybe even see if we had homes to go back to, you know? However, the general had a different idea and kept the doors locked. He was driving himself crazy by staying in his office for days at a time and always playing that stupid harmonica of his. Eventually, we couldn't take it anymore. So, a couple of techs tapped into the base's automated security grid and overrode all the doors, but doing so triggered the robots too. We all fought our way through a swarm of sentry bots and turrets to escape the place. It was just me and 3 others that made it out alive. General Retzlaff stayed in his office the whole time, so he either got killed by the bots or managed to deactivate them and is probably still holed up there. Either way, we weren't going to stick around to find out. I saw Grev start walking back to us, but I was caught in Quinn's story and asked, "What happened after you guys got free?" The military ghoul was caught in his own story as well and continued, "Me and the survivors made our way south out of Death Valley and wandered California for a while. The world was still gray, and mutants hadn't had time to really develop. So, it was just us wandering the blasted roads and ruins of the land we used to know. Occasionally, we would encounter a group of cannibals or other ghouls like us. Eventually, we found our way north into Nevada and the ruins of Las Vegas. The city looked like it was barely even touched by the bombs, but that wasn't the same for the surrounding area that was flooded with radiation. The city echoed with the sounds of gunfire as the survivors of Vegas fought each other for everything they could find, even over a year later. It was a mess. Most of us ended up staying in the outskirts of town, which was too irradiated for survivors, but just fine for us. I spent years there in Vegas as the rads began to cover less of the city. Many of the survivors I was with eventually left our group to see if loved ones somehow managed to survive the blasts and the following anarchy. I stayed put, but always thought of heading east. I still wonder if my old home in DC is still standing. Hell, most of my old unit before the bombs fell was from DC, like my friend and platoon sergeant. I wonder if Levin or Severin turned all ghouly and whatnot. Ha ha. Learning that the man I was talking to never managed to make it home in almost 200 years was pretty sad. So I asked the man sincerely, DC is pretty far, right? He gave a light chuckle at my ignorance of geography, shrugged and said, it's over 2,000 miles east of here. So yeah, ha ha. Anyway, about 50 or 60 years back, I found myself in Southern California and ended up crossing the Colorado near the former tribe of Havasu. May they rest in peace. So, wandering through the Sonoran wasteland, I stumbled upon Luke AFB. The old base was largely spared the bombs somehow, and the soldiers and airmen that were stationed here kept the military tradition going strong as their community grew. Some are like me and have been ghouls since the bombs, but over several decades they have been taking in wasters, teaching them old-world military values, and offering protection to people of the valley much like your Mr. Swilling does. When I found them, I hadn't been officially in the army for over 100 years, but a lot of what you learn in the military sticks with you. After learning about my background, my prior service in the Old World Army, and my combat role as a field medic, they welcomed me into their ranks with open arms. It was then that I remembered first seeing Quinn and the red crosses on his uniform. I studied the man's current combat fatigues, and the red cross symbol was present again. So I stupidly thought about the legends I heard in Phoenix several days prior, and asked, "Field medic? Is that what those red cross symbols mean?" He said very seriously, "No. Alongside my work here with the Army of Glory, at night I am a member of the Night Hospitalers." I was about to ask why his other organization steals medical equipment from caravans when he burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, I'm just joking. Of course it means I'm a field medic. I don't know how that old story got started, but it's been around before I ever came to Luke. Sort of like the Skinwalker's Chupacabras, or even that Lost Dutchman's mine. I did hear a rumor that some folk found the Lost Dutchman's mine a while back, but no, the Night Hospitalers aren't real. We would have killed a few of them by now if they were really a thing. Ha ha. I thought his joke was pretty funny, but when he mentioned the Lost Dutchman's mine and how some people found it, my heart stopped. I quickly changed the subject before he could continue by asking, "So, anyway, you ever think about going back to DC anymore? You know, now that you've been at Luke for a while?" He looked off into the distance at the now setting sun. "Nah, it's too late for that. Plus my family and friends are probably long dead. I can guarantee that the Reds bombed the crap out of DC. The whole place is probably part of the ocean or Potomac by now." Just then, I noticed Grev was standing behind Quinn and said, "All right, Grev, you ready to get going?" The old-timer gave me a grin and responded, "Yes, sir." Quinn looked back at the old man with surprise. "Forgot you were with us, old man. I get so lost when I'm talking, ha ha ha." Grev shot back, "Old man? I heard your story, you're 200 years old." "Ha ha." Quinn said, "You're right, ha ha. Say, you guys need an escort back to Phoenix?" I quickly said, "No need, we have agents waiting to help us haul the crate back at a designated rally point. We're moving the things to a secret location before heading south. Also, the less people, the less attention." He said, "You got that right. Well, let me at least escort you guys back to the armory and I'll see you off." Quinn escorted us back to the armory. There, Grev and I lifted the box of fusion cores and headed out. The box didn't seem very heavy at this point, but I knew we had a long walk. If there wasn't aerial transport coming to take us all the way to Gold Canyon, I would have shot or detonated myself right there. Passing the gate, we carried the box through the ruined streets and around pockets of radiation. With sweat pouring from us, we made it about 3 or 4 miles outside the AFB's gate when it was finally pretty dark out. The sun was almost completely below the mountains, and the evening breeze was cool. However, with all my energy put into carrying that box, I was radiating a wave of heat. I thanked God no mutant decided to attack us, or Grev's hip didn't decide to go out. I don't know what I would have done. We reached a spot in the middle of the ruins that appeared to be about halfway between Luke AFB and the first shantytown around the Phoenix Gate. Taking a seat on the crate, gasping and trying to regulate our breathing, I was about to press the button for extraction when something hit me. I said to Grev, "It's the left side button to call the extraction, correct?" Grev huffed and puffed. "Yeah, left to extract, right to detonate the charge." I asked, who the hell even made it an option to detonate these things? But did he mean left from our perspective, or left from where they were facing us? Grev was silent, and so was I. I think the both of us were pretty sure it was the left button from our perspective, but I couldn't believe I hadn't thought about that until this moment, Grev said with a chill in his voice. Left from our perspective. I think? We sat there silently again, just listening to the wind and pondering which button would kill us or save us. Finally, a static voice came from my chest that said, "You're left to extract, you dumb shits." That was it. The Enclave was listening to us the entire day. Just as I had the thought, what if this is a trick? Do they even need us anymore? Grev pressed the button. Thankfully, we didn't detonate. Just under 30 seconds later, I heard the faint sound of explosions coming from the desolate lands west of Luke AFB. The explosions continued constantly for almost 10 minutes. I counted them as I monitored the ruins for scavengers and predators. The explosions went on for another 2 minutes after a brief pause, and the vertibird came in to land about 50 yards away. The hydraulic ramp door opened, and there were the boxes of parts. A trooper in that black power armor jumped out unarmed, took the box of fusion cores, and motioned for us to get in. As soon as we stepped inside, the ramp closed, and we took off back to the Superstition Mountains. We flew for 20 minutes into the night, but we didn't land in the hangar. They set us down just at the foot of the Superstition Mountains with Gold Canyon to the west. The aircraft ramp lowered, and the pilot came over the loudspeaker telling us to get out. We both stepped out the door and were in front of Major Braxton, who had 2 power-armored guards, both carrying Gatling lasers. The vertibird took off and flew over the mountain where I heard the faint sound of the enormous hangar door open in the quiet nighttime desert. I worried that the Enclave would have a Legion mentality and kill us once we finished being of use. So, the Major approached, and my nerves went wild with what could happen. The aircraft engine noise was gone, the desert was silent, and the wind blew slowly when Major Braxton said, "I'm assuming all went well?" Grev responded, "Yes, sir, cargo is on the bird right now." The Major smiled and said in a convincingly grateful way, "I have to say, I didn't really expect a couple of wastrels to be able to pull this off. I heard every word of your conversation with that General McMahon, and luckily for everyone, you had some of your own business there. It seems as though we picked the right wasters for this task, but I do admit this whole thing wasn't entirely coincidental. So, I offer my sincerest thank you." Grev and I remained silent but nodded as the Major went on. "I hope you understand that my words actually mean something. Any other member of the Enclave views anyone living in the wasteland as hostile. For your efforts, I will always consider you as allies of mine. However, you will always be enemies of the Enclave." At that point, I was absolutely terrified that Grev and I were going to be disintegrated into piles of ash. Instead, the Major said simply, "Thank you for your help, but may our paths never cross again." I maintained my composure, but mentally heaved a sigh of relief before saying, "So, we're done here?" Major Braxton gave a silent nod and turned towards the mountain, apparently ending the conversation. Just then, he stopped and said, "Oh, and we will be leaving in the morning. Our mechanics are going to work through the night getting our birds operational." He flicked a keycard at Grev, and the old man bent to pick it up as the Major added, "We will be gone by the late morning. Bunker's all yours, so use it as needed. But if our forces come back here, everyone within will be slaughtered. Goodbye, mutants." We watched the Major lead his men to the wall of the mountain. I observed as he pulled out his own keycard and swiped it on a rock. A cluster of rocks slid open, revealing a hydraulic door. With that, Mr. Grevsky and I walked back to Gold Canyon, and I was just thankful that the Major kept his word. I recalled stories about that enclave from when I was growing up, and everything said that they were the very image of evil. Although their methods were extreme, as evidenced by their conduct in Gold Canyon over the past year, I couldn't help but think that maybe they weren't so bad despite their extreme views about wastelanders. I again wondered why the NCR would even try to fight an incredibly isolationist group of people who wanted almost nothing to do with the outside world back in the day. Back in town, the lights were all on. Apparently, everyone was wide awake from the sound of the vertibird only a half hour earlier. Entering the town in the middle of the night, people approached us asking what happened and where we'd been. All we said was, "We solved the problem." Chapter 38. You wanted to see the sun? At Grev's shack, we sat down at the table, congratulated each other with a shot of some of his agave moonshine, and chatted briefly. He said that he would be glad to keep his promise and offer any assistance to the Phoenix evacuation. Gold Canyon didn't have a leader, but many of the locals looked up to Old Man Grevsky and other veteran scavers like him. So, he said that he would have some of his best men map out a good route to the south and east of the scrap town. He promised he'd get the maps on the next caravan to Phoenix. Now that the town was out of enclave control, it would be much easier for traffic to flow freely through the area south of the Phoenix ruins. Mr. Grevsky was very supportive of the resistance, so he also promised robotic assistance when the Phoenix refugees reached Gold Canyon. The town's restored robots could easily be used as extra pack mules or even defenders if necessary. The two of us toasted our success and a new alliance with Swilling's resistance through another shot of agave moonshine. However, we were both incredibly tired from the strenuous day and had to fall asleep. I woke up just after 9:30 a.m., still exhausted from the past few days. As soon as I stepped outside with my new friend, we heard the somewhat faint sound of the vertibirds taking off on the other side of the mountain. 4 little winged dots rose up from the other side and disappeared in the eastern sky. The whole town stopped to watch the figures disappear, and soon enough, that was all people were talking about. Many asked if the lockdown was finally lifted and approached Grev seeking answers. Grev and I warded off the herd of curious people. After about a half hour of explaining to Gold Canyon residents what we went through, we heard the town's watch shouting that someone was approaching from the mountain. We felt it was our duty to see what it was, so we ran towards the gate and saw a lone man in the middle of the desert walking towards the town. The stranger got closer and I made out more details. He was walking slowly, wearing an all-black outfit and waving what looked like a stick with a white cloth tied to the end of it. I watched the guy get closer. As the mercenary captain was about to order his men to fire, Grev waved them off and motioned for me to follow him as we approached with weapons drawn. The guy saw us coming towards him and stopped in the sand, holding the white flag high above his head. The man remained motionless, and Grev and I stopped within only a few yards of him. The guy was clearly one of the Enclave based on his bizarre apparel. He was a young man, wearing a technical-looking black bodysuit with several gray wires running to his joints, and had a full suit of black ballistic plates on his chest, arms, and legs, all with the E emblem. In the man's hand was the little white flag attached to the stick, and his other hand remained open, high above his head. There did appear to be a rifle slung over his back. His combat helmet had a flashlight mounted on the side, and covering his eyes was a pair of fully tinted goggles. We stood silently in front of the stranger with our guns pointed at him for a few awkward moments. Suddenly, a smile grew across the stranger's face, and he said, "Hey, I know you guys." Grev responded sharply, "Explain yourself, boy. The Enclave is gone." The stranger responded by shrugging his shoulder and saying, "I know, I skipped on the evac. You two are the guys who brought us the parts, right?" Still pointing my gun at him, I said, "Yeah, why did you skip out on the evac?" He simply said, "I didn't want to go," and remained silent. His answer didn't satisfy either of us, so Grev said, "We're gonna need more than that. Who are you, and why are you here?" He responded, "Oh, right. I'm Corporal Dalton, ex-member of the Enclave," and remained silent yet again. I added, "He asked why are you here too?" Continuing, Corporal Dalton said, "I just didn't want to go east with them. It seemed like we were going to another big bunker, and I hadn't seen the sun in years." Confused by his simple answers and suspicious presence, I asked, "So, you deserted your post because you wanted to see the sun?" He lowered his hands but stopped when Grev and I raised our guns back up at him. He nodded and said, "Yeah, pretty much. I want to see more of Arizona." Got sorta tired of being with the Enclave. We stayed quiet for a minute, and then Grev and I backed away to talk while still aiming our guns at him. Corporal Dalton kept his hands in the air as I asked Grev, "You think we can trust this guy?" Grev surprisingly sympathized with the stranger's weird reasoning and said, "Well, I have never been locked in a bunker for years, so I suppose I can imagine wanting to be outside." I thought for a second and asked Corporal Dalton from the distance, "Where you want to go? You just want to stay in Gold Canyon?" Corporal Dalton said, "Nah, I want to see what's out there. I plan on leaving soon enough. Highly doubt your town would like me sticking around after all the shit the Enclave put you folks through." We thought to ourselves for a second, and before we could say anything, he said, "I can show you how to work that keycard if you want." Grev said, "You know we got the keycard to the bunker?" Dalton said, "Yeah, I was escorting the Major last night back before they loaded up all the suits of power armor." Nodding at Grev, I said to Dalton, "Sure, lead the way." Still not really trusting this apparent deserter, we had him lead the way to the foot of the mountains with our guns at the ready for anything funny. It took us about an hour again to reach the base of the mountain where we saw the Major last night, and Grev handed Dalton the keycard. We watched him swipe it between a small collection of rocks, and the rock pile slid out of the way, revealing the door. Stepping inside, we proceeded 100 yards down a rocky corridor to a cargo lift that went up a couple of stories, and then moved east to another hydraulic door. I grabbed the stranger as a human shield with my shotgun aimed at his spine, ready for a possible ambush of some kind. Dalton didn't protest the aggressive gesture in even the slightest. The cargo lift locked into place just before that steel door, and it opened up. We were inside the hidden outpost, but there was no surprise. Everything was gone, and it looked like an average cave again, but with a few bits of scrap and the outline of where the cords, terminals, and consoles used to be. I released my shield, and the man put a few feet between us. Dalton said as we looked around, "See? They're all gone, just as you said." I asked the guy, "So you just wanted to stay in Arizona, huh?" He paused to look at us. "I know how suspicious it may sound, but my brothers are all gone, and there isn't much harm I can do to anyone all by myself. So yeah, I just wanted out of the Enclave. I got tired of living in bunkers and been trying to find my out for the past year." Grev asked, "So it doesn't bother you that every person out there is a mutie?" He scoffed. "I never really bought into that. On the oil rig, they pounded the idea that we are the last real humans on Earth into our heads. But after they moved some of us to Navarro, I saw firsthand who the troopers captured and what they looked like. Sure, Wastelanders are a bit dirtier than us who lived in safety on the rig, but they were people too. Despite what the eggheads tried telling us about background radiation and all that bullshit, I know a person when I see one. I'm looking at two right now." Grev said, "I don't know if the people of Gold Canyon would like you too much considering what your kind did to our little town," he said seriously. "Like I said, I don't plan on sticking around too long." I thought for a second and then looked up at the stranger, thinking I could use an extra gun on my side. My plans with the Resistance were going to take me all around the Sonoran Wasteland and into the incredibly dangerous southern desert. So I was surprised even myself when I said, "I suppose you could come with me if you want. I have a task that's going to take me around most of the wasteland." Dalton took off his goggles, exposing a look of surprise, before he smiled and said, "You'd do that for me? You're too kind, stranger. I swear I'll help you out wherever I can. Just get me away from here in Gold Canyon, haha." Thinking for another second, "Sure, you seem honest enough. I could use an experienced Enclave soldier helping me out around the wasteland." He smiled wide and said gratefully, "You sincerely won't regret this, man, I swear. Plus, I could use an experienced Wastelander to help me along too. You probably know the wastes better than anyone in the Enclave." Grev gave me a look like, "I hope you know what you're doing," and we left the bunker heading back towards the town. Another hour later and back at town, my new companion had guns trained on him from every direction, but I waved them off with assistance from Grev. The old-timer led me to the center of town as Dalton looked all around taking in the sights despite the looks of anger from the townsfolk. Back at my Pona in the center of town, it was right where I left it, and I gave it one of the apples from my pack. Dalton commented on the beast, asking if we could ride it, and I said it was mine. As I got ready to depart, he explained how he saw some of the scientists examining the corpse of one, but didn't know if they were feral or not. Some of these beasts were, but some were used by wealthier wastelanders and even some of the Legion or Resistance agents. It quickly became clear that Dalton was largely ignorant of everything in the wasteland, but I didn't have time to explain the whole world to him. I had several tasks building up. Chapter 39. An Unofficial Garbage Man. I gave my goodbye to Mr. Grevsky, and he assured me that his runner was going to deliver the maps and a letter of proposals to the capital as soon as possible. Grev and I finalized our discussion about his town's contribution to the resistance as Dalton stood behind me. I didn't care that Dalton could overhear our chat. The guy seemed too dumbstruck just being outside of a cave to know what Grev and I were discussing. With that, I helped my new companion onto the back of my Pona, and we rode off into the wasteland back to Scottsdale. I remembered that Mr. De Niro told me to head back to Scottsdale as soon as I was done with my first resistance objective. It was almost noon exactly, and I rode on through the wasteland, around the craters and the pockets of radiation. After several hours of tracing my path to Gold Canyon, it was almost 11 p.m., and we were just outside the eastern gate to Scottsdale. Dalton, my new traveling companion, hardly spoke a single word the whole way. Upon arrival, I had to give the password I was told, even though Dalton looked clean enough for the both of us. I never really went through Scottsdale at nighttime, so I was pretty amazed. The streets were all lit up, and the buildings too. There were multicolored lights in the water of the fountains on every corner that made the waters appear light blue, purple, pink, green, or red. I couldn't imagine what Dalton must have been thinking, since he apparently spent most of his life in underground military bunkers. We made our way through the streets, past all the gorgeous people, to the Bridgeton Towers where Mark De Niro lived. At the tower, I talked our way past the lobby security and confronted Mr. Kekos coming out of the elevator. He greeted me and inquired about my new companion, but I assured him that he was just an extra gun. Just then, it occurred to me that I'd only known this guy for a little more than half a day, and was just about to bring him in on my game of serving two hostile factions. I again figured that he was too ignorant to understand anything that was happening. So, I told Dalton to answer anything Mark says with complete honesty, and to keep his mouth shut otherwise. The young man simply gave a zipping motion across his mouth, threw away an invisible object, and gave me a thumbs up. Confused by the gesture, I followed Mr. Kekos into the elevator, accompanied by the stranger I met earlier the same day. Up at Mark De Niro's penthouse, of course. We walked in on him having an all-out orgy in the living room with his 7 girlfriends. Mr. Kekos shouted over the ruckus, "Mr. De Niro, you have visitors." Turning to us, Mr. Kekos showed piercing anger as he said, "You see why I was in the lobby?" Mark shouted as his girlfriend scrambled away still naked. "Hey man, good to see you. Kaisar's Domini Platos fella just stepped out, so I don't get a lot of time for rabble-rousing these days." "Ha ha." Throwing his robe on, he approached and asked, "Who's your friend?" I responded still uncomfortably, "This is my buddy Dalton. He's just an extra gun helping me navigate around the wasteland." Mr. De Niro extended his hand for a handshake. I realized where his hands were a minute ago and swatted Dalton's hand away. Mark looked at his own hand and said, "Oh, right, you. Anyway, good to meet you, man. Any friend of my accomplice is a friend of mine, haha." I remembered Mr. De Niro was not subtle in even the least of ways, but Dalton stayed quiet while I said, "What's the word from our mutual friends?" He smiled. Same old, same old. They actually want to hear from you. I'm surprised one of the couriers hasn't contacted you. Anyway, since you're here, you're done with that first task Mr. Swilling had you doing?" I said I haven't been contacted, but I've been a little tied up recently. He smiled again with a wink. "You and me both, ha ha. No biggie, brother. I'm sure you got some kind of info in the past week. They literally just want anything." Reaching into my pack, I pulled out a notebook I'd been using to log all my activities since the unification. I gave him the pages I made from when Mr. Swilling assigned me to monitor Phoenix at the brothel. I said, "Here are the locations of several minefields the people of Phoenix are planting. They're training everyone for the defense, and the number of refugees from Legion expansion keeps growing the defense force." I gave him the list of communities I was ordered to enlist for the evacuation, and Mr. De Niro had a servant make copies of them. I explained my dealings with the U.S. Army, outlined some of the key details regarding Gold Canyon, and summarized with, "Gold Canyon is sending a runner to the capital with the proposed evacuation routes and their official list of aides. Also, the Army of Glory is sending a squad to guard the evac rally point at the town square. and pledged their full support in the defense of Phoenix to buy the refugees enough time to get some distance. He said, "Wow, you got some good stuff here, buddy boy. And good to know Gold Canyon is doing better now. I heard that place has been silent forever. Ha ha. Man, Legion's gonna crush 'em all, ha ha. Isn't that neat?" I looked at Dalton, who simply looked confused and on edge about his involvement at Gold Canyon, but I responded to Mark emotionlessly with, "Anything you need." Mark glanced up from my notes and said sarcastically, "Look at you with the servile attitude. Ha ha ha. This brings me to the next assignment. You know the atomic stalkers I wanted you to enlist?" I nodded. "Sure." Mr. De Niro continued, "Well, the timeline's been pushed up and Kaisar wants them to be integrated immediately. You are to head over there as soon as possible. A group of Kaisar's boys will be waiting for you at the I-17 gas station, you know the one. They should actually be there now." He handed me a letter and added, "Inside are your mission orders and everything Kaisar demands from them. You can rest up here, but I suggest you head out as soon as possible." I said, "Thanks, Mark. I could use a good night's rest. And don't worry, we'll head out in the morning." Mark gave a satisfied nod at me and a sly look before I added, "Oh, and thanks for the Pona again. It really makes traveling easier." He gave his signature pearly grin and said, "No problem, buddy. Just head to the guest room and grab some shut-eye. I got some stuff to take care of." Then, he walked up the stairs to his bed while rubbing his hands together and making strange, seductive sounds. That night, I stayed in the guest room I stayed in before, and Dalton laid on the couch by the door. No prostitutes this time, just Dalton, who still had a confused look on his face when he asked out of the blue, "You're a double agent, right?" I asked, "What do you mean?" He said, "Back in Gold Canyon, you and Mr. Grevsky talked about plans with some resistance fellas, and even said to Mr. Grevsky that you were thankful for his contribution to the resistance. Then you told this Mark guy all about the plans, and it's pretty clear he's not going to use that info you gave him to benefit Gold Canyon, or this refugee group you mentioned." I paused for a minute before saying, "This situation I'm in is very complicated." He immediately said, "You know, we've had scouting reports of this Legion you guys were talking about." I asked, "Is that so? What do you think?" He paused for a minute, then gave me a wide grin. "I like them. They know how to get shit done. I like their whole, what's the word, attitude?" My face turned to a smile briefly before I caught it and said bluntly, "You're the first one who's admired anything about them. Hell, even Mark thinks they're disgusting, but that crazy teen is starving for power. I've dealt with the Legion before, and they ain't too respectable if you ever met them in person." Dalton stared at me silently with a face that said, "That wasn't the point I was making." I knew he was really trying to get me to admit to playing both sides, so I continued with, "Well, you wanted to travel with me. You're in this mess as much as I am now." He again stared at me for a moment before ending the silence by saying, "I wasn't completely honest with you and Mr. Grevsky." His statement caught me off guard, so I asked seriously, "How so?" Still reclining on the couch opposite the bed, he said, "I don't really have too much sympathy for wastrels, like I said." He chuckled to himself and said sarcastically, "Call me a sociopath if you want. Ha ha. I just prefer the term realistic." I squinted, showing my obvious concern. "Elaborate." He said, "All I'm saying is that there are exceptions. Like, you seem like a colorful individual, and this Mark guy seems like a man in charge. But I've seen observations of Phoenix, and I helped lock down Gold Canyon." He paused for a moment before saying, "Cesspools. That is all they are and all they can ever be. The people out here stew in their own filth, and most are just wastes of space who aren't giving any sort of benefit to anything at all." I interjected, "Then why didn't you go with your pure human brothers out east?" He responded simply, "Because I didn't lie about wanting to explore the wastes. With them, it was just moving from bunker to bunker, and that isn't any kind of life. But that also doesn't change the way I feel about the squatters and pieces of shit that seem innumerable out here." I honestly couldn't believe the arrogance of the man I picked up out of compassion. It was the same sympathy I had for the cesspool residents that made me pity the seemingly misunderstood enclave deserter. I didn't say any of that, but I instead sought more of the man's mindset and asked, "So what's so appealing about the Legion to you?" Then Dalton answered that question in a way that made me wonder if he himself had spent his whole childhood in a Legion soldier camp, or if he was just that unsympathetic. "I don't know much, but I've seen enough of our scouting reports on them to like the way they carry themselves. They are proud of their symbol. Everyone in the Legion has a purpose, soldier or slave. Everyone has a role. They seem to march together for that symbol, and that symbol alone, regardless of whether they are forced to or not. The Enclave's goal at one time was to purify the whole wastes and cleanse it of the filth. It seems to me that is what the Legion is trying to do. Pure human or not. I was quiet for a minute before testing out Dalton's values even further. I'm not sure what to say, but what sets me apart from the rest of the wastrels? Who's to say I won't end up selling out everything I do for the Legion to help the Resistance? Also, I used to be a hermit, wastrel, or waste of space at my shack in the desert only a couple of months ago. How am I so different if I was the same as one of the other innumerable pieces of shit, or a Phoenix garbage squatter? The fact he answered so quickly and what he said astonished me. You've already chosen your side. The way you reflexively smiled and then corrected it when I said I admired the Legion. Dead giveaway. But to answer your other question, you carry yourself with purpose. You may not notice it, but others do. People can see that there is more to you by the way you simply walk and talk. Your goals aren't about just finding food for the day, shooting up some drugs, or fixing some junk bot like the scrappers in Gold Canyon. I interrupted by asking, so what about the Resistance? They carry themselves with pride or purpose as well, and they have a noble goal like helping the people of Phoenix escape from a psychopath and his army of murderers, slavers, and rapists. He again seemingly had his answer all lined up. The wasteland is full of trash, trash people, and actual trash. I'm pretty new to the wasteland, but from what little I gathered through all your interactions over the past 12 or so hours, the Resistance wants to move the trash from one place to another. The Legion wants to burn the garbage. Trash is trash wherever it is. You can either move it from one place to another, or you can burn it, and maybe forge it into something worthwhile. Listen, all I'm saying now is, I like you, Drifter. You'll ultimately do what you'll do, but it'll be good to take care of the garbage problem with you. Haha. With that, I turned away from the man, said goodnight, and we went to sleep. Chapter 40. Bikers Without Bikes. Bikers without bikes. I had a lot to think about. Dalton had a strange energy about him that made me like the guy, but that conversation made it abundantly clear that he liked the Legion. Despite never meeting the group, he was a supporter of theirs and had all the familiar disdain for Phoenix as Mark, Joshua, and Caesar. He even had the horrible identitarian mind of Decanus Roblasius, whose group hatred was focused on the tribals of northern Arizona. However, I was still caught doing errands for both factions and wondered what would happen if I ended up doing what I said and handing all my Legion intel to the Resistance. Would Mark De Niro, Mr. Kekos, and Dalton turn on me? Though that answer seemed obvious, everyone I met other than Resistance agents made it seem like I had a destiny for the Legion. Maybe they were all correct. I wondered about that until I met Old Man Grevsky, went on my little adventure with him, and even talked with Quinn Andrews. Grev and I did a lot in a short time, and it all ended in success. The feeling I got when I knew for sure that Gold Canyon was finally safe was better than most highs I ever had. The feeling I got when I heard Quinn's story about all the awfulness before and after the bombs fell, and him finally finding his place at Luke AFB made me hopeful. However, all my work for the Resistance up to this point was only furthering the Legion's goals once I handed Mr. De Niro my notes. It dawned on me that there would be a time very soon that I would have to ultimately make a decision on where my loyalties are. One was obviously more noble than the other, but the thought of power and simple survival can make people do strange things. Getting lost in my thoughts, I went to sleep. After a couple hours of great sleep in the penthouse bed, I forced myself to wake up and began getting ready to head out. Dalton woke up just after me and did the same. It was nearing that time, and we left the penthouse with Mark and Mr. Kekos still asleep in the early morning. The streets of Scottsdale were quiet as I saddled up and headed towards the north. We traveled through the wastes only hearing the galloping of my Epona, staying clear of a stumbling horde of ferals, and avoiding caravan traffic heading into Phoenix. On the old highway, the sun was high over the mountains, and soon the large gas station came into view. This was an area of the wastes with little activity given the increasing Legion expansion. Legion territory was still away north of the old gas station, but the wastes between it and the edge of the slaver society was desolate. Riding up to the gas station, several figures emerged from the chipping old ruin. I slowed to a stop, and a Decanus aimed his weapon at us. The Decanus approached us, followed by the spear or machete-wielding legionaries, and shouted, "It's best you turn back, wastelanders, or end up on a cross," I shouted. "Ave Decanus, true to Caesar. I come as Caesar's servant from the city of Scottsdale." We dismounted, and the Decanus said, "You must be the frumentarius we were told to await. Forgive me, I was only following security standards." I responded, "No problem, Decanus. What's the situation?" Instead of answering, I saw the man's confused expression, even through the tinted goggles, helmet, and black face mask. He asked, "Who is this?" We were told there would only be one of Caesar's agents. Feeling somewhat superior to the common grunt, I said authoritatively, "Never mind him, he is an extra gun I conscripted and a loyal follower of Caesar." The Decanus turned his head and asked Dalton, "Is this true?" Dalton said genuinely as he could, but confused by the way Legionary spoke, "Yes, Decanus." True to Caesar, the Decanus turned his head and said to me, "He checks out." The Decanus then gave me a short brief on the situation. "Our Lord has ordered us to follow you east into the territory of the dissolute and raiders. Caesar has had similar dealings with them, but they remain somewhat hostile in manner to our Lord. I know you are aware, but you are to contact their leader and ensure their cooperation in the coming siege. Here, take this." He handed me a folded piece of paper that was the official proposal of demands from Caesar himself. I still had the letter Mark gave me after the unification ceremony as well as the copy before heading to the gas station. The Decanus continued, "The paper details what Caesar expects as well as proposes to our new ally. I suggest you read that before speaking with their leader to have an idea on how to lean them more in our favor. I'm sure I don't need to remind a member of the Frumentarii that failure in the eyes of Caesar is not tolerated." I pocketed the note and said, "Excellent, Decanus. What should be expected on approach to the Cave Creek Fortress?" He gave a small salute and said, "The raiders used to kill our scouts to the valley, but ceased open engagements when another frumentarius gave notice of a potential offer from our Lord in the future. He was beheaded, but they recently halted beheadings of our emissaries and are expecting new word from our Lord in the form of a messenger and contingent of legionaries, us. I advise caution on approach and readiness for the worst. We are ready to depart when you say the word." Somewhat worried about getting beheaded, I threw my nerves aside and said confidently, "Very good, Decanus. I will lead the way. Have your men follow me in column behind my steed and keep the weapons lowered or on safe." The Decanus gave a salute and formed up his men in 2 columns behind my Pona. Before moving forward, I faintly heard Dalton say under his breath, "Perfect." Not sure what he was talking about, but I headed east on my Pona as the Decanus followed with his contubernium. Dalton took the moment to dismount and follow behind me with his laser rifle drawn. He reasoned by saying that someone riding bitch would compromise my authority. At that, I agreed. As we went east into the desert, I began noticing sculptures made out of motorcycle and car parts much like the Have-Sioux tribal totems. From that point, I knew we were in atomic stalker territory. We approached the fortress of Cave Creek, only signified by the mountain at the center of the fortress, just as a small dust storm began clouding my vision. Crack. A few shots rang out, and the formation spread itself out. I wasn't expecting an ambush or a trap, but I quickly dismounted while Dalton fired his laser rifle into the blinding sands, and the Decanus released a burst from his submachine gun at the shadowy figures cloaked in dust. Some of the legionaries dropped their spears and pulled spare sidearms from their belts to fire into the desert. As I poked my head up over the rocks, I noticed 10 figures, still blurred by the dust, running towards us. I shouted to my legionaries, "Hold fire," and the figures approached slower. The hostiles noticed the cease in gunfire and walked even slower towards us as I shouted through the winds, "We come on behalf of our Lord Caesar." The figures got closer, the dust settled, and they became visible. Every raider to emerge from the dust was clad in black leather gear, wrapped in chains and patchwork steel pieces welded to their vests. They all had large beards covering their faces, with mohawks or bald heads, and face tattoos with flame patterns or sinister objects. The thugs sneered at us with hammers, machetes, chain flails, or bowie knives drawn. One of them with a blue mohawk, a black beard, fogged road goggles, and a noose tattooed on his forehead stepped towards me. The raider shouted, "You some of them Legion boys, huh?" I gave a motion at the silent legionaries and Dalton before responding, "Yes, we have business with your leader on behalf of our Lord Caesar." He grinned under his goggles, gave a head motion, and said, "Follow us." Boys,